when you're in a hotel and you need to speak to the operator, you need to spell out the names. So say, I am Mrs. Wilder, Wilder, as if Laura Ingalls Wilder doesn't know how to spell the word Wilder.
Welcome to Land of Laura, the irreverent yet scholarly podcast about all things Laura Ingalls Wilder. Any hardcore fan of Laura Ingalls Wilder has undoubtedly heard about the Detroit Book Fair, where Laura delivered a famous speech in 1937. Today, Eddie Higgins, whom you'll remember from episode 4, returns to the studio. She'll tell us exactly why the book fair was so instrumental to Laura's career. She'll also clue us in about what exactly is in the Laura Ingalls Wilder archives at the Detroit Public Library. And later on, listen in as we revisit our field trip to the library. Eddie Higgins, welcome back to the Land of Laura studio. It is so great to see you.
Thank you for having me back, Sandra. It's lovely to be back, and I've really been enjoying the podcast in the meantime.
We are here today to talk about a few things, all pretty much in the context of the Detroit Book Fair, which happened in October of 1937. And Eddie happens to know a whole lot more about this book fair than I do. So, Eddie, from the great state of Iowa, can you please tell us, why is the Detroit Book Fair so important in the context of Laura Ingalls Wilder?
Well, your listeners have probably heard mention of the Detroit Book Fair quite a lot. It does get mentioned in the books about Laura, and also it gets quoted in material about Laura as well. So if any of your listeners have ever heard the phrase, "All I have ever told is true, but it is not the whole truth," that's a quote from the Detroit Book Fair speech that Laura gave. And similarly, any of your listeners who have recently read Pamela Smith Hill's fantastic new book, Too Good to Be Altogether Lost, that title itself is a quotation from the speech that Laura Ingalls Wilder gave at the Detroit Book Fair. So the book fair itself was an event, a week-long event that was run at the Hudson's department store in Detroit. And it was an event called A Week of Authors. So it was lots of authors coming in to give talks about their work and so on. And they had a program of adult authors and they had a program of children's authors. And Laura Ingalls Wilder, alongside her then editor at Harper's, Ida Louise Raymond, they were the schedule for the final afternoon of the book fair.
And so in 1937, let's sort of pinpoint where this is in Laura Ingalls Wilder's career. She was between Little House on the Prairie and On the Banks of Plum Creek.
Yes, that's right. Plum Creek is just about to come out. This is Laura Ingalls Wilder's opportunity, having been invited to this book fair, to get out there and promote her book in the way that authors do these days. So she gets this invitation, and you can actually see the program for the book fair online. It's part of the Detroit Public Library's digitized collections. I can read you the invitation that was put on the program to advertise it by Hudson's, and they said, "We cordially invite you to join with us in this 4th annual book fair, intended as an informal get-together of those who write books, those who read them, and those who publish them. 40 famous authors will be our guests in a series of daily programs, affording you an opportunity to see, hear, and meet in person writers and artists of books you have enjoyed." So you can see there that this was very much a two-way street. Hudson's get to promote their store and have hopefully people coming in and buying books. Authors get to promote their latest material and talk about their writing process and gain publicity. And the people who attend get to meet all these famous authors, in particular the marvelous Laura Ingalls Wilder.
And she's 70 years old at this point.
Yes,
is that right?
She's 70 years old, and this is really her one and only entry onto a national stage, if you like, a national audience talking about the books. So she has given speeches before related to her farm work, and she's given talks at book clubs and things like that. So it's not that she's not a speaker at all, but this is kind of a bit of a step up from other things that she has done. And also what's significant about this speech is that as far as we know, this was written completely unaided by Laura Ingalls Wilder. So a lot of what Laura Ingalls Wilder wrote passed through the typewriter, shall we say, of Rose Wilder Lane. And it's a matter for another podcast exactly how much input Rose Wilder Lane had into Laura Ingalls Wilder's works. But for this particular speech, as far as we know, she wrote it essentially unaided without Rose. And William Holtz, who wrote The Ghost in the Little House, the biography of Rose Wilder Lane, he kind of acknowledges slightly begrudgingly that this was something that Laura put together herself. And we can deduce that because there's letters between them. Rose writes saying, I'm impatient to see what it's like. And then when Laura presumably forwards her the text, there's a letter where Rose says something like, I've seen it now and it's very fine, or something like that. So she's there. She's received this prestigious invitation. She's 70 years old. She and Al Manzo decide to go from Mansfield to Detroit. They hire Silas Seal to drive them. They put Laura up in quite a fancy hotel in Detroit. I think it's the Statler Hotel, which isn't there anymore. But if you look at pictures of that, Google up pictures of what that was like in the 1930s and 40s, look pretty nice, I have to say. So Laura is on quite the trip.
So why don't we talk about how Rose did try to prepare Laura for this speech, or this trip, I guess. Rose is living in New York. She doesn't help her mother write the speech, and she doesn't go to Detroit, but she does help in her own Rose way.
She does. She does indeed. Let's talk about that. I always love to talk about Rose. So Rose did kind of two things to help prepare for this trip. And she's at the Grosvenor Hotel in New York at this stage. So this is before she's got a place in Danbury. And she sends off a little bio to the Hudson's people who are putting together the program for the book fair, and that they print up basically in the information about Laura Ingalls Wilder for the program. So that's the first thing, and I'll read that out in a moment because it's really rather sweet.
And the program is available to view at the Detroit Public Library.
Yeah, the program's available in their digitized collection, so you can literally go online and see the whole thing. So this is in the program that was produced for the Detroit Book Fair. And on the final page, because she was the final speaker, we turn to Laura Ingalls Wilder. And this is what they had to say. Mrs. Wilder's daughter, Rose Wilder Lane, sends us a delightful biography of her mother, which we would like to quote. Born in the log house described in Little House in the Big Woods, my mother's earliest memories are of life in the Indian Territory, where her father was a pioneer hunter, trapper, and Indian fighter. Later, they travelled west into Minnesota, Iowa, Dakota Territory. At 18, she married and went to live on a farm at Mansfield, Missouri, her home to this day. My mother has done all the work a farmer's wife usually does, is an expert cook, dairymaid, and poultry raiser, was for years household editor of Capper's Weekly and contributor to McCall's and Country Gentleman. As Secretary-Treasurer of a branch of the Federal Farm Loan Bank, she handled nearly $1 million of government money without one bad loan or delay in payment. My mother is now about 70, small, dresses more in the mode than I do, reads Adventure magazine, makes gingerbread famous throughout the county. And then Hudson's, or whoever wrote this program, has just added on the end, surely a woman who has stepped most gracefully from one generation to another, using the experience of her pioneer past to solve the problems of the present day. And that's the bio that they put in the Hudson's program, which I just think is so lovely.
It really is lovely. I kind of caught on something at the very beginning where Rose says that her mother's earliest memories are from Indian country.
Yes, I know.
And this is 1937.
1937, yeah. So it's interesting that early on in Laura Ingalls Wilder's career, we know that later on there was much more of a sustained effort by particularly Rose Wilder Lane to promote the idea that basically everything that Laura said in the books was actually true, and that there was no fictionalization or exaggeration or omission or anything like that. Whereas here, we have got Rose writing a little bio in which she quite openly says, oh, my mother's first memories were of Indian Territory, which either means that the books are out of order or it means she was making up the stuff in Wisconsin, because clearly, as book order goes, Wisconsin comes first, and therefore this can't be reconciled with this statement. So this is interesting. And William Anderson actually points out that Harper's, Laura's publishers, issued a sort of publicity statement about Laura Ingalls Wilder in the 1940s, in which Rose Wilder Lane also kind of alluded to this idea of the books being out of order. But here in 1937, we've got her freely admitting that as well, or at least implying it. So that is an interesting point. Also, the fact that she says at 18 she married and went to live on a farm at Mansfield, which of course we now know is not true at all, because they didn't move to Mansfield until 1894 and they got married in 1885. So Rose not necessarily showing herself to be the most reliable biographer of her mother here. But nevertheless, I think this little piece that she writes here for the Hudson's programme is really very sweet.
Yes, it is. It is very sweet. And so how else does Rose help her mother?
So the other thing that Rose does is that she writes a letter to her mother from New York, intending Laura to read it on arrival in Detroit, basically trying to encourage her and give her the strength to deliver this speech. And what I most love about this letter is any of your listeners with elderly parents will know that there is a stage at which you feel that you have to explain some kind of like new experience or new technology to them in very kind of words of one syllable, because you're worried that they can't cope with it, even though they have gone through their life to that day and managed to raise you. There is that moment, isn't there, in any sort of adult life where you start thinking of your parents as unable to cope with things. And that's kind of the tone of this letter, in which she's basically really trying to reassure Laura about the experience. So it starts, "Welcome to Detroit. Remain calm, darling." and she just goes on to sort of say, remember that, words to the effect of you're the person that everybody should be running around trying to fix. So don't you do any running around. If you want something, ask for it. It's going to be somebody's job to do what you want, and always remember that. And she literally gets down to the granular level of explaining, when you're in a hotel and you need to speak to the operator, you need to spell out the names. So say, "I am Mrs. Wilder, Wilder," as if Laura Ingalls Wilder doesn't know how to spell the word Wilder. And it's that level of sort of don't panic about anything, don't worry, just go in and do your best. And in the middle of it, she says, "Here's a charm from the Quran that may help you," in Rose's sort of amazing style. And
she calls her mother a lovely lion in this, doesn't she?
She does. She says you'll be a lovely lion. She gives quite a lot of quite savvy advice, where she's basically saying to her mother, play dumb, talk to Harper's, talk to anybody, don't commit to anything, because George By does all the business stuff for you. George By was her agent at the time. So you can just be a little sweet old lady, and anybody you talk to is going to buy your book. So get out there and talk to people. So she's also giving her like a real old pep talk about how to drum up business, basically, for the little house enterprise. And then at the end, she goes back into reassuring mode. She says the pictures that Laura's had taken for publicity are just absolutely beautiful. She says, you'll be a lovely lion. She says the chiffon velvet dress that Laura has is beautiful. She says, you're going to be the most dazzling woman at the whole show. So she reverts into this really sort of encouraging, uplifting mode at the end of the letter. How I do wish I could be there and see you and hear you talk. Much love, Rose, is how she signs it off. And I just love this side of Rose's character that we see in this letter.
Isn't it great? Isn't it great? And anyone can read this letter via the Rose Wilder Lane collection at the Herbert Hoover Presidential Library and Museum in West Branch, Iowa, which would be the great state of Iowa.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I'm not aware that it's been published anywhere, but it is available in the archives there.
Wonderful. So tell me about the speech itself.
Yeah, so the speech itself, Laura's handwritten draft of the speech that she wrote, that's also part of the collection, the Rosewater Lane Papers at the Herbert Hoover Presidential Library and Museum. But that, if you want to read it without going to the Herbert Hoover, then you can read that as part of the South Dakota Historical Society's Pioneer Girl series. So it's published in full at the opening of the Pioneer Girl Perspectives book that they published in 2017. And if any of your listeners haven't got that book, I heartily recommend it.
It is a fantastic book.
It is, absolutely. It's a series of basically a collection of articles by Wilder scholars on just various topics that haven't particularly been explored before. So Caroline Fraser, Bill Anderson, Don Miller, Sally Ketchum, all the big names are in there, and it's just a fantastic book. And the opening chapter is the text of the book fair speech. And in the speech, she tells kind of her version of how she came to write the Little House books. As we said, she was only up to Plum Creek by this time. It was about to be published the following week. So she's giving some like teasers for that, and with a mind to the publicity aspect that Rose has coached her about. And at that time, she's planning for 3 more books, although we know it ended up being 4 more books, because her planned final book, Prairie Girl, ended up being split into 2, and that became Little Town on the Prairie in These Happy Golden Years. So I alluded, I think, to the most famous quote earlier on about all I have told is true, but it's not the whole truth. And she's saying there essentially that what she's put in the Little House books is true. And then amazingly, she then goes on to give a huge anecdote about the Bloody Benders of Kansas. Oh, God. Which, of course, we know is not true. Oh. So and that's quite a chunk of the speech, actually, where she talks about the Bloody Benders.
Yeah, that's a really weird insert into the speech, especially with how much real estate she dedicates to it. Basically, the Bloody Benders were a murderous family in Kansas that both Rose and Laura tried to claim Pa had something to do with tracking down, which is entirely false.
Yes, it's strange, isn't it? The idea, I think, originally came from Rose, didn't it? Because it's in one of the versions of Pioneer Girl. I think not the original version of Pioneer Girl, but when Rose is revising it, trying to get it sold, this story suddenly pops up about the Benders. But clearly, Laura Ingalls Wilder latched onto it and decided to talk about it. Well, if anyone is interested in learning a little bit more about that, the Pioneer Girl Perspectives chapter by Caroline Fraser gives more background on that. I feel like I'm turning this into an advert for that book, but buy this book. It's a great book, everybody.
Yeah, if you don't have it, it belongs in your library.
She also then uses the phrase that I mentioned previously. We had a busy, happy childhood, but all of it, Sister Mary and I loved Pa's stories best. We never forgot them. And I've always felt they were too good to be altogether lost, which was the phrase that Pamela Smith Hill then used for her most recent book. And then there's a section where she reflects essentially on how she has realised that she has seen kind of the entirety of the development of the settlement, if you like, of modern America in terms of the frontier and the Indian country of the Great Plains, I think she calls it, something like that, the frontier towns and the railroad expansion and homesteading and so on. And she basically just says, I was there and I decided to write books about it, to explain her motivation, if you like, for writing the Little House books. And she also makes a few little jokes as well, which is, I think, typical of Laura Ingalls Wilder. It's sort of a little bit like that funny bit in On the Way Home when she's writing her diary about the trip to Mansfield, and she makes a few little sort of acerbic remarks there that are quite funny about some of the people that they see. So with this one, she talks about Almanzo, because she talks about Farmer Boy, and she says basically he's replaced his horses with a new car now. Again, I'm paraphrasing, and he drives this car, and she says at least he holds the wheel. I do the driving with my tongue, which I think is a typical sort of little Laura Ingalls Wilder joke there.
So by all accounts, this trip to Detroit seemed to be extremely successful. And On the Banks of Plum Creek was published, did you say, just the following week?
Yes, I think so, like literally 4 days later or something like that. And that, of course, went on to be a Newbery Honour book. And somebody, although I'm afraid I can't remember who, I think has described it as the perfect children's book. One of the editors or publishers, I think, said that. Can you remember who that was? I can't remember.
It was either Ida Louise Raymond or Ursula Nordstrom, I think. Maybe I'll verify that afterwards and come back and say which one is correct. A side note here, I did go back and check, and in a letter, Laura Ingalls Wilder's agent, George By, told her that Ida Louise Raymond, her editor at Harper & Brothers, had recommended On the Banks of Plum Creek to dozens of authors as, quote, the model for a perfect juvenile, unquote. And back to the episode. So, Eddie, you did mention that the program for the Detroit Book Fair is part of the digitized collection at the Detroit Public Library. Can you tell us more about the collection that they have?
Yes, the Detroit Public Library actually has a whole Laura Ingalls Wilder collection in its rare book room, which is called the Burton Historical Collection. And this is a whole collection of material that Laura Ingalls Wilder donated to the library in 1949. And it consists of letters and photographs and other documents. She donated a couple of her school books. And I would say the stars of the collection, the things that are most worth seeing to me anyway, are the manuscripts that she donated. So she donated a handwritten draft and a typewritten draft for each of two of her titles, The Long Winter and These Happy Golden Years. And just to put that in a little bit of context, obviously Laura Ingalls Wilder, like any author, went through quite a drafting process as she was crafting the Little House books. And of course, Rose Wilder Lane was heavily involved in that as well, in terms of the editing process that the books went through. So that means that there are various drafts at different museums and libraries and archives around the country of the different Little House books. Some of these drafts are sort of very rough handwritten. Some of them are nice and neat handwritten. Some of them are typescripts with lots of edits. Some of them are fair typescripts and so on. But what the Burton Historical Collection has at the Detroit Public Library is a fair handwritten copy of each of those two titles. So in other words, Laura's kind of final handwritten draft. And then also the almost final typewritten draft, so the one that George By then sent off to Harper's for publication and is therefore almost the very final version. That's also found at Detroit. Both of those books did have an intermediate typewritten draft with lots of edits on it and so on. That's not held in Detroit. That's held at the Herbert Hoover Presidential Library in the great state of Iowa. And if you're not able to get to Detroit, the great news is that quite a lot of this collection has been digitized. So some of the letters and photographs and so on, that's been made available on the library's website, and you can see that. That's accessible from anywhere. In terms of the manuscripts that I was just talking about, the handwritten manuscripts for The Long Winter and These Happy Golden Years, those have been scanned and digitized, but that hasn't been made available on the website. So you need to contact the library if you're interested in seeing that. The final typewritten manuscript hasn't been digitized for either of those two titles. So if you want to see that typewritten draft, you have to go in person. And of course, if you want to experience the feeling of actually seeing Laura Ingalls Wilder's own handwriting in person, then Detroit Library, that is the trip that you need to be making.
And speaking of the trip that you should be making, Eddie and I, along with our friend Claire Sandler, decided to travel to Michigan and meet up with our other friend, Michigan native Michelle McClellan, an archivist and historian in her own right, in addition to being a huge Laura Ingalls Wilder fan. And the four of us got together to plan a trip to the Detroit Public Library. Actually, I should say Eddie did all the planning. Eddie, if people want to go to the Detroit Public Library to see this collection, how should they do it?
The great news is that it couldn't have been easier to actually arrange the appointment to go and see the material that we wanted to see. The hard part, as it turned out, was getting to Detroit and getting stuck in lots of traffic jams. But once we were in Detroit, seeing the material at the library was very easy. So we're talking about the Burton Historical Collection, which you will find on the Detroit Public Library's website, and I'm sure you'll put the link in the show notes, Sandra. And they have certain times when they are available open to anybody on a drop-in basis. And they have other times when you can sign up for an appointment, basically, and say in advance that you want to go at that particular time. And on the Saturday that we went, we had an appointment in the morning, and then we were able to stay in the afternoon in their open hours. And I would say, even if you're planning to go in the open hours, it's probably a good idea to get in touch with them anyway and let them know that you're particularly interested in the Laura Ingalls Wilder material, because we found that they'd got it all ready for us because they knew that we were coming, and they had somebody ready to show us all the manuscripts and the photographs and talk us through the collection, which was hugely helpful. And when I filled in that form on their website, I have to say, I was a little bit worried that I might get a reply to sort of say, well, who are you? Are you some kind of famous researcher? Why should we let you see our Laura Ingalls Wilder beautiful treasures? And of course, they weren't like that at all. They were unbelievably helpful and actually seemed very excited that we wanted to come and see the collection.
And if you are able to get there, we highly recommend it. It was one of the, I'm not embarrassed to say, best days of my life. Sitting in that room.
we had such fun. And as I say, the archivist was so welcoming, and I haven't got an enormous amount of experience of going to archives, but the experience that I do have is you should never be off put at the thought of going into an archive and what's it going to be like. They're genuinely excited to see us. They're like, yes, come on in. We're so pleased that you want to see our stuff. So an absolutely lovely, wonderful day actually looking at Laura Ingalls Wilder's own handwriting, and it was breathtaking.
And on that evening, the four of us, Eddie, Michelle McClellan, Claire Sandler, and I, sat in the living room of our rental with our wine and our snacks to relive the day, and I'm going to play that right now. You might hear a little bit of repetition based on what you've already heard, and the sound is not all that great. But even with those two caveats, I think you'll enjoy hearing it as much as we did recording it. So this weekend, a few friends and I decided that we were going to descend upon the Detroit Public Library to look at what Laura Ingalls Wilder materials were available in their rare book room. So what is in the collection?
So they have Laura's kind of fairly well-developed, handwritten
on the 50/50 tablets.
Yes, on the tablets of both the Long Winter and These Happy Golden Years.
So the archivist actually took out a box that had several 50/50 tablets in the box and was able to flip through them for us, that we could then see Laura's handwritten in pencil pages for the Long Winter and These Happy Golden Years. And that was nuts to see.
I mean, I'm practically tearing up just remembering that moment. I mean, when she first opened it and I saw it, and this is Laura's pencil written. I mean, yes. And I've seen reproductions of this. I've seen photographs of these over the years, of course, but standing right there and looking at it, it was amazing. It was powerful. I got choked up just looking at it.
I did too.
We did flip, didn't we, to the proposal?
Yes.
See, we were all a little bit kind of overcome at that moment.
Yes. The archivist said, so what do you want to see? Because she couldn't flip through every single handwritten page and let us read them, because that would have taken all weekend. So,
as much as we would have liked her to.
As much as we would have liked her to.
But she was very, very patient.
Oh,
she was flipping to as many pages as we wanted, basically.
She seemed to get more and more interested in Laura and her writing the more time she spent with us.
We lured her in.
We did.
We also brought our books and were able to compare pages.
The actual published books
from the written draft, which is really cool to see what was exactly the same and what was a little bit different.
And it was funny because you could read a line on the handwritten tablets and say, you know what? I don't remember reading this before. One of the coolest things we saw was a map that Laura had drawn of De Smet that didn't look like the map we have necessarily seen in other books. It included the road to Brewster's, and it included Pearson's livery barn, which kind of makes it seem like she had drawn it for these happy golden years.
And it was on the back of a letter from a student, from a child who had written a fan letter to her. And we were reading that and enjoying it because there had been several. And then we flipped over and saw the map on the back, which was amazing because the map that we've seen in other books has been credited to being at Hoover. And so we didn't know we would also be seeing one in Detroit.
We also got to see Laura's history book and the independent fifth reader that was used by the Ingalls family with handwriting inside from Laura,
Mary,
and from Mary.
And some friends. They used it as a little autograph book, and some friends had written poems to them in there.
That was really cool. So in the fifth reader, we flipped, didn't we, to the page with the ride of Paul Revere,
mm-hmm.
and Tubal Cain. Is that how it's pronounced? Is it Tubal Cain? I've never known that.
There are a lot of words that I pronounce the way I pronounce them because I've only read them in the Little House books.
And I don't think we actually talked about why this stuff ended up at Detroit.
So in the late 1940s, the Detroit Public Library named a branch after Laura Ingalls Wilder. And she was invited to come for the dedication of the branch library and was not able to do so because Almanza was ill. And she did not want to leave him. And so for that reason, she sent materials, including the manuscripts and 2 of her school books and some illustrations from the first editions of the books, not the Garth Williams illustrations, but the previous ones. And all of that material now is at the Detroit Public Library. The independent fifth reader was first Mary Ingalls' book. And one of the most moving parts, I think, was to see her name and the date and Burr Oak, Iowa, inscribed in the book, presumably in her own handwriting, although we don't know that for sure.
And with the date on it, it looked like it was a birthday present for her. Mm. So that was a sighted Mary getting this book and writing her name in it.
An 11th birthday present.
11th birthday present.
And didn't one of the books have Rose's name written on it as well?
Mm-hmm. Under Laura's name.
Yes.
Yeah, they had Laura, the history books.
Yeah, the
Laura,
history one.
1882. And then just below it, it said Rose Wilder. Mm-hmm. Right, without the last name. So we were thinking
Wilder.
And can't you just picture Rose at like age 7, 8, or 9 finding her mother's history book and just deciding that she needed to write her name in it too?
My daughter did that with a lot of my books.
Had any of you been to the Detroit Public Library before?
Yes, I had several times.
Had you seen these archives before?
I'm honestly not sure. I believe I'd seen pieces of them, but I don't believe they've always been available all the way through. One thing we did learn about as well was some of the conservation that has been done on these materials. So the history book and the fifth reader in particular required some considerable conservation that had been done. And I thought it was really cool that that information was right there on what's called the enclosure. So the books are kept in these boxes that probably were custom made to hold them and to make sure they're in proper conditions and all of that. And so there was some sort of a label in the box that described the work that had been done on each of those books to repair it and to preserve it. And some of that is really about chemistry. It listed the pH when the materials came in and then the pH after they'd been treated. And so there's a lot of work that goes into keeping these for all of us to enjoy now.
And that all sounds rather familiar to you because you work as an archivist.
That's right.
So, Michelle, explain about what is all this business with gloves? It used to be if you went into an archive, you had to put gloves on.
So my understanding is that gloves were recommended for many, many years because the natural oils in our hands can harm archival materials, particularly photographs. but potentially other things too. And so wearing gloves provides a layer between our skin and the oils and chemicals that are just naturally part of our bodies and these often quite fragile materials. My understanding is that the current thinking is that the trade-off in facility of handling materials, but when you wear gloves, you don't have as much fine motor ability, right? Yeah. You're basically more clumsy, that you might be more likely to tear or harm the materials if you're wearing gloves. So some archives have switched from cotton gloves to nitrile gloves, like that a surgeon would wear, that are, tighter to the fingers, and you keep your dexterity, I guess. But some don't require them anymore. But if you'll notice, we were asked to wash our hands and or use hand sanitizer before we were allowed to touch the materials. So that is an attempt to get at least some of the top level, including if we had just put on lotion or something like that, to get that off our hands before we're handling the materials.
And a lot of the materials we looked at were in plastic sleeves too.
That's
so
right.
Most of the things we didn't actually get to fully touch. The books and the typed manuscripts, I think, were the only things we actually got to touch. But it's such an honor to be there that it's, I don't mind at all the fact that they ask us to do all these things to protect the materials.
Digitization has a preservation aspect too. So we often think of it in terms of making things more available, that you don't have to go there in person, you don't have to be there physically, you can access it off the internet. But it's also true that helps preserve them, because it requires a lot of handling to get them digitized. But then think of how many people can just look at them on a screen and not have to touch the actual materials. So that's often considered a tool of both access and preservation.
Michelle, you're from Michigan. What can you tell us about Hudson's, where the book fair speech took place?
So Hudson's department store was a flagship department store in Detroit for decades. And I can't remember the year it was founded or first built, but they added on to it over a number of years, and it was enormous. And many people from Southeast Lower Michigan, myself included, have very fond memories of going to Hudson's. It was a big deal. It was a special occasion. They had these magnificent windows on the, that front of the street that would be decorated at the holidays. They had a special room that was set aside for children to shop for their parents or family members going into Christmas time. The parents couldn't come in, but you would go in, and a saleswoman would help you, choose some things for your family members. There was a restaurant on the top floor where the treat I remember was a Mickey Mouse sundae. So you would get a scoop of vanilla ice cream and these chocolate cookies kind of tucked in with some chocolate syrup that looked like a Mickey Mouse hat. And so it also served clearly as a kind of public space, because that's where the book fair was in 1937. So anybody of a certain age who grew up around here, if you say Hudson's, they know what you mean and likely have very personal memories of going there themselves.
Do you remember when you found out that Laura Ingalls Wilder had been there?
I was so excited to learn that Laura Ingalls Wilder had been there, because that meant I had been in a place where she had been. Yes. Super exciting.
When did they take it down? When did they demolish it?
I'm not sure. I had moved away from the state. I want to say maybe 1999.
Oh, wow.
Hudson's helped pioneer the suburban shopping mall, and that wound up being kind of
their downfall?
Their own,
of their own making?
Yes. Yes. But and I've shopped in other Hudson's around in some of those malls, but none compared to the downtown.
It was demolished in 1998. So you're very close there, Michelle. I feel like we haven't really talked about the significance of the book fair speech.
It does get quoted all the time.
It does. So it's been like a rich source of people wanting to quote Laura Ingalls Wilder's ethos in her approach to writing and her motivation in writing the books. So she's there in 1937. She's had to travel from Mansfield. She's staying in quite a fancy schmancy hotel, and she's got to go and give this speech. It must have been, I would have thought, quite nerve-wracking for her, but also it was like an amazing opportunity, because Plum Creek was about to come out. she's basically been invited to almost like a trade fair. Almost, it's not that, but that's the sort of opportunity that there is for her to mix with other people and kind of promote her book. And Rose wrote to her saying, everybody you talk to will buy Plum Creek, so talk to people.
Yes, Rose did write her a lovely letter to prepare her for it.
Saying that she would be a lovely lion.
Part of the reason that speech is so important is that it's really the only time that she stepped back and talked to that degree of what she was trying to achieve in writing the Little House books.
Because she wasn't a speech giver at all.
No,
really,
she wasn't. And was this the only public speech that she gave?
Didn't she
about this? I mean, she gave speeches about poultry. Yeah. That's what led to her Missouri Ruralist column. And I think through her club work, she would give different speeches at different conventions and so on. But I believe this is really certainly of this length, of this kind of significance.
So another speech she gave, which connected with what we saw today at the Detroit Public Library, was when she gave her big history of the United States speech in Littletown on the Prairie.
At the school exhibition.
At the school exhibition. And we got to see the history book from which she studied to prepare for that speech, which was pretty amazing, just thinking about all the descriptions in the books of her sitting at the table at night and studying, and to hold in her hands the very book she studied from.
That was amazing.
Mm-hmm. She doesn't talk about Burr Oak in the published Little House books, as we know, but I think it's in Pioneer Girl where she says that she and Mary would practice that they had a wonderful elocution teacher in Burr Oak, and that they would be in their apartment practicing their pieces, speaking their pieces, and they only found out later that people would come and be downstairs and listen to the girls practicing their recitations, and that too is the very book they would have been using to do that. And so for me, when we have her writing about a particular object and then to see that object is really powerful.
Yeah. And we talked about how they were such a literary family, and yet they didn't have the luxury of having very many books. So how having those books just full of information and poems and things must have just been such a treasure for them, and not surprising them that she kept it all the way until 1949 when she donated it to the library.
Both of them were pretty dense books. Yeah. Like several of us thought they would have been larger than they were. It just in, height and width. But the print is pretty small and there's a lot packed in. I wondered at times how they could keep going back to the same text, even if this was all they had, just kind of keep going back to these books over and over as she describes through the Little House books. But there's a lot to work with in there.
So we asked the archivist today how many people come to see the Wilder collection. And she said she estimated probably we were about the fourth group this year to come and see them. And she said it seemed like it ranged from researchers to just people who were interested. And I love that as somebody who just loves Laura and loves archives and history, but is not a professional researcher, that I was able to see these really precious things, even though I'm not going to use them for anything professional.
And that was our day of debrief of our trip to the Detroit Public Library.
It's so lovely to listen to that again and remember how excited we were in the moment after that lovely day that we'd had at the Detroit Public Library. I have to say, I can't wait for our next Laura Ingalls Wilder field trip, and I wonder where we'll go next.
I wonder. Thank you so much, Eddie, for coming today.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me, Sandra.
Wow, that was quite a weekend. If you have the chance, I highly recommend getting together with your Little House friends and taking a trip, be it to a home site, a museum, somewhere that's full of landmarks, or a library with an archival collection. I promise you'll find that it is good for the soul. Land of Laura is created and executive produced by me, Sandra Hume. Special thanks to Canadian folk punk band The Dreadnaughts for our theme music, and extra special thanks to all the guests like Eddie and Claire and Michelle, who give so generously of their time and knowledge. Make sure you subscribe to Land of Laura on your favorite podcast channel so you can hear about episodes as soon as they drop. As Pa says, there's plenty more down cellar in a teacup, and as Ma might have said, it takes all kinds of people to make a Little House world.